Acid, LSD, tripping. What is acid? What are the effects? What does it do? That's what we're going to get into today. Let's go. K-Rugs, the Soberdog, coming at you. Before we get into it, remember, Soberdogs does not promote or condone any drug use. Please seek professional medical help if you have an addiction. LSD, acid. Lysergic acid diethylamide. That's what LSD stands for. That's what acid is. Some of the street names for acid, there's a bunch. You got Acetite, Aceto, Alice, Angels in the Sky, Bart Simpson, Battery Acid, Black Acid, Black Tabs, Blotter, Blotter Cube, Sugar Cubes, Blue Acid, Micro Dots, Sunshine, Cali Sunshine, LSD, Electric Kool-Aid, Hits, Instant Zen, Kaleidoscope, Leary, reference to Timothy Leary, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, famous, Beatles song, Smears, Sugar Cubes, Uncle Sid, and Hippie. A lot of different names for acid for LSD. LSD acid, in the form it is created in, is a crystalline. Usually it is mixed with other stuff and then it is turned into a liquid, which is either, dripped onto pieces of paper. That's, like the famous, acid you'll see in movies, TV, different things like that. It's usually that little tiny square of paper, and the paper itself is nothing, but dripped on it is the acid. Also, some people, even though not as common, will get the pure crystalline form and they can snort it, they can inject it, or swallow it. But typically it is the liquid form, and that is somehow converted onto something for people to ingest. The other ways they have converted this liquid form is drip it onto candy, gummy worms, Sour Patch Kids, things like that. Also dripped onto sugar cubes. And, so people eat the sugar cubes. The acid itself can just purely be dripped on, the tongue or under the tongue. Gel bubbles, it looks like, packing bubbles that you squeeze. It's a little gel bubble. And inside is, the acid. That's another one. Also tablets like pills. Those are all the different forms that people either get or take acid in. Acid, LSD, is odorless, colorless, and has a very, very slightly bitter taste, but typically undetectable. Acid was first synthesized in 1938 from a fungus that grew on rye. Albert Hofmann was the man who invented it, synthesized it. Now, as the story goes, a couple years later, when he was working with it in a lab, Hofmann indirectly touched it and touched his mouth and went on the first acid trip, felt the effects of it. They said that Hofmann rode his bike to and from work, and when he was riding home on his bike, all of a sudden, he experienced the first LSD trip, the first acid trip, with all the colors and everything was vibrant, and his senses were increased. And Hofmann is credited and is the scientist that first synthesized and took acid or LSD. LSD is a Schedule I substance in the United States. Its two precursors, lysergic acid and lysergic acid amide, are Schedule II substances, which means they have some, health and research benefits. LSD itself in its pure form is still a Schedule I. I do believe that this will probably be changed soon, considering the trends in, hallucinogenic drugs, all the different trends even around mushrooms and microdosing and things in our country, the decriminalization. Acid is very strong. It's not measured in grams. It is typically measured in micrograms. A 50 to 75 microgram dose for an adult would, create a low to moderate trip, but it is a very potent substance. How LSD actually works on the brain: it hits the dopamine, adrenergic, the glutamine, and the serotonin receptors in our brain, causing the effects we experience or somebody experiences after taking it. Out of those receptors, the one that is specifically, hit the most, scientists believe, is that serotonin receptor. It actually, once it gets in the receptor, kind of closes in on itself and continues to fire, creating, the hallucinogenic effects that we get of the acid. So it's just this, serotonin, extreme boosts effect. Scientists have done brain scans on people who took LSD, and it lights up the visual cortex of the brain. There are certain areas that are extra lit up when people are on acid, and there's other areas that kind of slow down, and the visual cortex is one that is beaming. LSD is considered non-addictive. It is far less dangerous than drugs like heroin, cocaine, meth, even alcohol. It is also, very physical harm is very rare from LSD. If and when physical harm is caused, it's typically because the person either has a pre-existing condition or they physically harm themselves because of the, trip. Just like the stories I'm sure many people have heard, myself too, is like somebody took acid and jumped off a building, man. Sure, that probably happened, but, that's one case. And the reason the person, died, unfortunately, is they were tripping and jumped off the building, but the acid itself did not cause them to die. It's very rare to take acid and then, it shuts your body down and you die. It's not like fentanyl where if you take too much, it'll slow your breathing down and you just, die, overdose or die. The effects of acid usually start 30 to 45 minutes after the person ingests it, depending on route of administration. If they're snorting it or injecting it, it'll be quicker, but most people take it, that's what they say dropping a tab. They take the tab and they either put it under their tongue, put it somewhere in their mouth to dissolve, or just swallow the whole thing, 30 to 45 minutes to kick in. And the high typically lasts 6 to 12 hours, with the peak being about, 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours in. The effects of acid are the actual scientific, physical, and mental effects are distorted perceptions, depression, anxiety, flashbacks, dilated pupils, elevated blood pressure, visual distortions, hallucinations, perceptual changes, altered sounds, nausea, loss of appetite, increased blood sugar, difficulty sleeping, dry mouth, tremors, seizures, impaired depth and time perception, and increased body temperature. And then the big one there being severe visual distortions, shape, color, sound, clarity, all the different things to do with, anything in the visual field. How people who have taken acid have described it is you have feeling more connected with nature, a sense of well-being, oneness with nature, oneness with themselves, oneness with the universe, ego dissolution, ego killer, problem solving, thinking more clearly, a sense of clarity, excessive thinking, deep thinking, anxiety-provoking thinking, and a general sense of calm. Different in multiple different areas, but a lot of people, when they do take it, they feel connected, they feel part of nature, part of the whole universe. 2019 survey from NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, said that 3.6% of 12th graders used LSD in the past year. So 3.6%, almost 4% of 12th graders took LSD in 2019. Compared to that same year, that same survey, 35.7% admitting to smoking marijuana. So that's a big difference. LSD, acid, is not a huge drug, and it definitely has not been a huge thing since the 60s and 70s. It is seeing a little bit of a gain, a little bit of momentum more recently with microdosing, different things like that. But it is generally perceived as, a lower abused drug in society, especially with younger people. As far as physical harm, like I mentioned earlier, very rare to physically get harmed because of the acid itself. If something does happen, usually it's another medication somebody's taking, other drugs they used while on it, or, pre-existing conditions, or just harming themselves because they're tripping out or hallucinating. As far as some of the negative effects that can happen, bad trips is the number one negative effect that people put down. Bad trips can be anything from physical bad trips, experiencing, dark energies, demon, dark, anything like negative, dark, or, emotional, combined with the physical, or just emotional, overthinking, excessive anxiety, thinking about situations, thinking about death, problems going on in their life. Most people report that with LSD, with acid, however your life is going and your mood prior to taking it is what the trip will create. So if you are in a good mood and in a, somewhat good place in your life, that will create a good trip or a happy trip. If you're angry, mad, depressed, anxiety, your trip will veer in that direction, or very upset with where you are in life or negative things going on. That is not 100% always the case. There's a lot of research around acid with near death, people who have terminal cancer taking psilocybin or acid, but they're guided during, the trip by a professional who guides them towards, being comfortable with, death and with their situation. But for the average user, inexperienced or even experienced, what mood you're in ahead of time will usually precipitate what type of trip you have. I mean, this is even a case very similar to alcohol. Most people I know that were angry when they drank, they're angry drunks. People that were very happy before they drank, most of them were happy drunks. Of course, there's exceptions. That is acid. That is all about acid, the actual science behind it, the effects of it, what it does. The next video, I'm going to tell you about my experience with it, because I've taken it plenty of times and had some interesting experiences on it.